My name is Allison Kennedy. I work as a freelance graphic designer in Boston. 4 years ago, I lost my husband in a car accident, and since then, I've been living alone with my 6-year-old daughter, Chloe. The grief of losing my husband ran deep, but I had to keep moving forward for Chloe's sake. While being swept up in daily life, I desperately tried to balance work and raising my daughter. 3 years ago in the fall, a change came into my life. I met a man at a local coffee shop. Brent Kennedy was his name, a man with a calm demeanor who said he worked for a property management company. He was standing behind me as I ordered a latte, and we became acquainted through small talk. He told me he'd just moved from Chicago. He said he wanted a fresh start, speaking with a gentle smile. After that, we started running into each other at the same coffee shop, seemingly by chance, and eventually began dating officially. Brent was kind and a good listener. When I complained about work, he would listen intently, and when I talked about Chloe, he'd smile and say, "I'd love to meet her someday." About 6 months into our relationship, I introduced Brent to Chloe. My daughter was shy at first, but thanks to Brent's gentle approach, she warmed up to him quickly. We played together in the park and went out for ice cream. Brent would crouch down to Chloe's eye level to talk to her, listening seriously even to her small stories. I was certain he would make a wonderful stepfather. After a year of dating, we got married. It was a small ceremony, but Chloe participated carrying a bouquet, and it was a happy day. I had asked about Brent's past. He said he'd gone through a painful divorce. He also mentioned there had been no children with his ex-wife. He didn't want to talk about it beyond that, and I didn't press further. Everyone has a past they don't want to discuss. I thought it would be enough if we could walk through our new life together. Life after marriage went smoothly. Brent worked diligently and supported our household financially. On weekends, we'd go to the park as a family, watch movies, and lived an ordinary family life. Chloe grew attached to her new daddy, and when she came home from school, she'd happily tell him about her day. I finally felt like I'd regained the warmth of the family I'd lost. But about 1.5 years after our marriage, Brent's attitude began to change little by little. He said it was work stress. He became quieter than before and grew irritable more often. He also started using harsher words with Chloe. "Sit up properly. Don't make noise." Those kinds of corrections increased. I told myself that men become strict as fathers. Perhaps because he wasn't her biological father, he felt he needed to discipline her properly. By thinking this way, I suppressed the small sense of unease in my heart. One evening, Chloe said in a small voice that she was scared of Daddy. I held my daughter and explained that strictness comes from love. Chloe didn't say anything more. Looking back now, I should have listened more carefully to my daughter's words at that moment. My work gained momentum, and I was entrusted with larger projects. Business trips lasting 2 to 3 days became more frequent. Brent was cooperative, telling me to leave Chloe to him. He encouraged me to focus on work. I was grateful for my husband's understanding and could leave on business trips with peace of mind. During my trips, I'd call home every day to check that the two of them were doing well. Brent would always answer, "We're fine, don't worry." Chloe would also speak in a cheerful voice on the phone, saying things were fun. I suspected nothing. I didn't realize at all that my family was slowly beginning to crumble. Work became even busier, and business trips increased to 2 or 3 times a month. A contract with a major corporation was progressing, and it was a significant turning point in my career. It was a project to create a brand's visual identity from scratch, and I had the client's full trust. It was the first time I'd been entrusted with such a large project since going independent as a freelancer. Brent remained cooperative. He told me to prioritize work, that he'd watch Chloe. I was truly grateful for my husband's support. Compared to the struggles I'd faced as a single mother, I was genuinely thankful to have an environment where I could focus on my work. But each time I returned from a business trip, I felt Chloe changing little by little. My daughter, who used to rush to me the moment I opened the front door, hugging me and saying, "Welcome home, Mommy," increasingly stayed in her room lately. When I called out to her, she'd appear with small footsteps, but without the radiant smile she used to have. Even when I asked about school, her responses were subdued. "How was school?" I'd ask, and she'd answer only briefly, "Yeah, it was fun." Before, she would have excitedly told me things like, "Today Emma and I played hide and seek," but recently she stopped sharing details. Whether I asked about her teacher or her classmates, I only got short replies. Her eating habits changed too. Even when I made pasta, which Chloe loved, she'd just play with her fork instead of eating. When I'd ask if her stomach hurt, she'd say, "No, I'm full," but in reality, she'd barely eaten anything. Her cheeks seemed to be getting hollow. I thought it was strange that a growing child would eat so little, but when I consulted Brent about it, he brushed it off lightly, saying she was probably just becoming pickier. At night, Chloe started having nightmares and crying more often. At first it was about once a week, but recently I was woken by her crying about every 3 days. When I'd rush to my daughter's room, Chloe would be curled up in her blanket, trembling. When I'd ask what she dreamed about, she'd only say she didn't remember. I'd hold her and rub her back, and eventually she'd calm down and fall back asleep, but the trembling of her small body worried me. One day at dinner, I noticed Chloe was wearing a long-sleeved shirt. It was just the beginning of September, and hot days continued. "Why are you wearing long sleeves?" I asked, and Chloe answered that she was cold, quickly pulling her arm back. In that instant, I thought I saw a blue bruise through the gap in her sleeve. "Chloe, did you bump into something?" I asked, and my daughter nodded slightly. She said she'd fallen at school. She didn't want to talk about it further. Children fall often, I told myself. But somewhere in my heart, I felt something was wrong. I consulted Brent about our daughter's condition. "Something's off with Chloe. I think something happened." Brent answered without taking his eyes off the TV, "Nothing in particular." He suggested maybe she was lonely without her mommy. He also asked if I could reduce my business trips. Those words made me feel guilty. Maybe I wasn't balancing work and family well. While my daughter was feeling lonely, I was prioritizing my career. Was I a failure as a mother? Such thoughts weighed heavily on my chest. But I couldn't just abandon a major project midway. There was the trust relationship with the client. If I quit now, everything I'd built would collapse. Telling myself this, I continued working. At the end of September, the project entered its final stage, and I was assigned a 3-day business trip to Seattle. It was important work presenting at the client's headquarters, and I couldn't refuse. The night before the trip, Chloe came to my bed. "Can I sleep with you?" she asked in a small voice. "Of course," I answered, and my daughter snuggled into my arms. As I held her body, which felt smaller than usual, I stroked her hair. After a while, Chloe whispered, "Don't go, Mommy." "What's wrong?" I asked, and Chloe answered that she wanted to stay with Mommy. "It's just 3 days. I'll be back before you know it," I promised, and my daughter said nothing more, just clung to me. The force of her arms was stronger than usual. The next morning, as I was bringing my suitcase to the front door, Chloe appeared in her pajamas. Her eyes were red and swollen. Brent said, "Don't worry," while placing his hand on our daughter's shoulder. He spoke gently, saying it would be okay. Chloe was crying. I held my daughter and repeated many times that I really would be back soon. But my daughter wouldn't let go. Brent pulled Chloe away, saying he'd take care of her and it would be fine. The taxi arrived. I left the house with a heavy heart. Looking back from the car, Brent stood at the entrance holding Chloe. My daughter's small hand was desperately reaching toward me. The work in Seattle went smoothly. The presentation was successful, and I received high praise from the client. But somewhere in my heart, I kept feeling anxious. It was like I'd left something important behind, a sensation that made my chest restless. On the first night, I called home from my hotel room. Brent answered, saying Chloe was doing fine. He also said she was already asleep. I asked him to tell her good night for me since I didn't want to wake her, and he answered briefly, "Got it," and hung up. On the second night, I called again. Brent said Chloe had gone to a friend's house to play. I looked at my watch. It was past 8 in the evening. At this hour? I asked, and he replied that she'd be back soon, and he'd have her call me later. But that night, there was no return call from Chloe. Not at 10, not at 11. I thought about calling again, but it was late and I reconsidered, thinking my daughter must already be asleep. On the morning of the third day, I called home before my presentation. Brent said Chloe had gone to school. She couldn't call yesterday. Was everything okay? I asked, and he just repeated, "Everything's fine, don't worry." His tone felt cold. After finishing the presentation and successfully completing the final meeting with the client, I was originally scheduled to return on an evening flight, but I decided to change to an afternoon flight. Something was wrong. A mother's intuition told me so. Alarm bells kept ringing deep in my chest. In the taxi to the airport, I called home multiple times. But Brent didn't answer. I left a voicemail message, saying I was coming back on an earlier flight. On the plane, I couldn't settle down. Staring at the clouds outside the window, Chloe's face floated into my mind. My daughter's recent behavior, the bruise I'd seen under her long sleeve, the nightmares at night, her thinning body. Everything seemed to connect, and fear welled up inside me. I had to get home quickly. That thought alone occupied my mind. The plane landed at Boston's airport just after 5 in the evening. Without even properly collecting my luggage, I ran to the taxi stand. I told the driver my address and asked him to hurry. As the taxi entered the residential area, my heart pounded violently. While watching the scenery flow past the window, I checked my watch repeatedly. 6:15. Chloe should be home from school. Maybe it was time for dinner preparation. I got out of the taxi in front of our house. While paying the fare, I looked up at the house windows. The living room light was on. Someone was home. But the front porch light was off. Normally Brent would have turned it on. Dragging my suitcase, I headed to the front door and opened it with my key. I called out, "I'm home," but there was no response. Normally I should have heard the sound of Chloe's footsteps rushing toward me, but the house was silent. As I took off my shoes, I listened carefully. I could hear the TV faintly. But no voices, no sounds, nothing. It was an eerie silence. When I opened the living room door, Brent was sitting on the sofa drinking beer. A news program was playing on the TV, but the volume was turned down low. Brent looked at me and said expressionlessly, "Welcome home." He added, "You're early. Where's Chloe?" I asked. My throat was dry. "Playing in her room," Brent answered. He turned his gaze back to the TV and took a drink of beer. His manner was so natural that it was all the more unsettling. I left my suitcase there and headed to Chloe's room. As I walked down the hallway, the sound of my heartbeat echoed in my ears. I placed my hand on my daughter's door and slowly opened it. Chloe was collapsed on the floor. Time stopped. My brain refused to comprehend the scene before my eyes. My daughter was lying on the floor. Not moving. "Chloe." My voice shook. I rushed into the room and reached for my daughter's body. Kneeling down and peering at my daughter's face, Chloe's eyes were barely open. She was conscious. But her breathing was shallow and her face was pale. When I called her name, my daughter's lips moved slightly. "Mommy." It was a weak voice. After saying just that, she closed her eyes again. There were blue bruises on her arms. Multiple ones. New and old. Her lip was split with dried blood. There was a red mark on the side of her neck. When I rolled up her sleeves, even more bruises appeared. What happened? You're okay. Mommy's here. I tried to pick up my daughter, but Chloe moaned softly. Something in her body was hurting. I shouldn't move her. Making that judgment, I ran to the living room. Brent. I was shouting. Something's terribly wrong with Chloe. What happened? Brent slowly stood up. He put his beer can on the table and shrugged. He said he'd just been a little strict. He added that I was being overprotective. A little strict. I couldn't immediately grasp the meaning of those words. This was being strict. Putting my daughter in that condition. I looked at my husband in disbelief. Brent was expressionless. He was calm, as if discussing the weather. She did something bad, so I disciplined her properly. That's all, Brent continued. There was no emotion in his voice. Discipline. That was discipline. My daughter collapsed on the floor, barely breathing, covered in bruises all over her body. That was discipline. My hands were shaking. I pulled my smartphone from my pocket and dialed 911. My fingers wouldn't work properly. The operator asked for my address and the situation. While answering, I returned to Chloe's room. My daughter was still lying on the floor. Her eyes were closed, but her chest was rising and falling slightly. From the living room, Brent called out that I was being dramatic. That cold voice echoed throughout the house. I gripped Chloe's hand. You'll be okay. Help is coming soon, I repeated. My daughter's hand was cold. A few minutes later, I heard a siren. The sound approaching from far away. I ran to the front door and opened it. An ambulance stopped in front of the house, and 2 emergency workers jumped out. Leading them was a man with a name tag reading Tom Miller. The other was a female worker. They both carried large bags into the house. Where? Tom asked. I pointed to my daughter's room. The 2 rushed toward it. I followed behind them. Tom knelt beside Chloe and began examining her quickly. The female worker was reporting on the radio. Tom looked at Chloe's arms, looked at her neck, and frowned. He said nothing, but his expression said it all. This wasn't a normal injury. The female worker put an oxygen mask on Chloe's face. Tom was taking her blood pressure and checking her pupil response. Their movements were swift and precise. We're transporting her, Tom said. The female worker went to get the stretcher. I stood frozen beside my daughter. Tom headed to the living room. I heard him ask if any family members were present. I followed. Brent was standing in the living room. The moment Tom saw Brent's face, the atmosphere changed. Tom's body stiffened. His eyes widened, and I could see the color drain from his face. For several seconds, Tom didn't move. He just stared at Brent. You. Tom's voice was shaking. No way. Brent looked back at Tom expressionlessly. He said nothing. Tom turned toward me. In his eyes was a mix of anger and some other emotion. It might have been fear. Ma'am, Tom said in a low voice. Is this man your husband? Yes, I answered. I couldn't understand what was happening. Tom leaned close to my ear and whispered. I actually know this man. He's dangerous. I'm calling the police immediately. I couldn't immediately absorb the meaning of those words. Dangerous person. My husband. Tom took out his radio and called for police dispatch. Then he instructed the female worker to transport immediately. The stretcher was wheeled out from Chloe's room. My daughter lay with the oxygen mask on, her eyes closed. I rushed to my daughter and told her mommy would come along. As I got into the ambulance, I looked back. Brent was looking this way from the living room window. His face had no expression. He just stood there, as if it were someone else's business. The ambulance doors closed and the siren began wailing. While continuing treatment, Tom said to me, "Your daughter will be okay. We're heading to the hospital now." Then after a brief pause, Tom continued. "About your husband, I'll tell you everything at the hospital. Right now, focus on your daughter." I held Chloe's hand. Her small, cold hand. I hadn't protected this hand. As a mother, I couldn't protect my daughter. Tears overflowed and wouldn't stop. "I'm sorry, Chloe. I'm so sorry," I murmured over and over. I was waiting outside the hospital emergency room. Sitting on a plastic chair, covering my face with both hands. Chloe was surrounded by doctors receiving treatment. All I could do was wait. I don't know how much time passed. The clock in the hallway pointed to 8 in the evening. 2 hours had passed since we arrived by ambulance. The treatment room door opened, and a doctor in a white coat came out. A woman in her 50s with a tired expression. "Mrs. Kennedy," the doctor called to me. "Your daughter's condition is stable. She shows signs of dehydration and malnutrition, but her life is not in danger." I breathed a sigh of relief. But the doctor's expression remained grave. The doctor continued. "However, your daughter's body shows clear signs of abuse. Various bruises, both new and old, evidence of cracked ribs, marks of strangulation on her neck. These are not accidental injuries." I was at a loss for words. Cracked ribs. Strangulation marks. "We have a duty to report," the doctor said quietly. "We've already contacted Child Protective Services and the police. An officer will be here shortly." "I understand," I answered. My voice was shaking. The doctor placed a hand on my shoulder. "This is not your fault. But right now, protecting your daughter is the top priority." "Can I see Chloe?" I asked. "Of course," the doctor said, opening the treatment room door. Chloe was lying on a white bed. An 4-tube was connected to her arm, and monitors displayed her heart rate. Her color looked a little better. Her eyes were closed as she slept. I sat in the chair beside the bed and held my daughter's hand. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I couldn't protect you. I'm truly sorry." 30 minutes later, 2 police officers arrived. One was a young man, the other a woman in her 40s. The female officer introduced herself as Detective Miller. "Please tell us the situation in detail," she said. In a trembling voice, I told them everything. Returning from my business trip. Finding Chloe collapsed in her room. Brent's words. "Where is your husband?" Detective Miller asked. "I think he's at home," I answered. "We've already dispatched a patrol car," she said. Then she added, "Actually, we've received detailed information from paramedic Tom Miller. He should be arriving here shortly." At that moment, I heard Tom's voice from the hallway. Detective Miller raised her hand and called to him. Tom walked quickly toward us, still in his work clothes and looking hurried. "Mrs. Kennedy, is your daughter okay?" Tom asked. "She's stable," I answered. Then I looked at Tom. "You said you knew my husband. What do you mean?" Tom took a deep breath and began to speak. "That man's name is not Brent Kennedy. His real name is Ryan McBride." Ryan McBride. It was a name I'd never heard. 6 years ago, he was charged with child abuse in New York State. The victim was his ex-wife's child. "My niece, Jenny." "Your niece," I repeated. My head was spinning. There was anger seeping into Tom's voice. Jenny was 6 years old at the time. The same age as your daughter now. That man routinely abused Jenny. Hitting, kicking, withholding food. Jenny had multiple broken bones, and eventually was hospitalized. Her life was in danger. I couldn't breathe. 6 years ago. A girl the same age as Chloe. In the trial, he received a suspended sentence. 3 years probation, Tom said, clenching his fists. But after that, the man disappeared. He changed his name and moved to a different state. We've been looking for him ever since. Detective Miller continued. We've already verified the records from New York State. Ryan McBride was reported for child abuse twice, in 2016 and 2018. He was formally charged in 2019 and received a suspended sentence of 3 years probation. I leaned back in my chair. 3 years. I had lived with this man for 3 years. With my daughter. Without knowing anything. We also discovered false identification documents, Detective Miller said. The name Brent Kennedy is a complete alias. Part of his work history was also fabricated. Why? I squeezed out the words. Why didn't anyone tell me? Isn't there something like a sex offender registry? He was registered as a child abuser, not a sex offender. However, after his probation period ended, he fled from supervision. Detective Miller said apologetically, it's a flaw in the system. When someone crosses state lines, tracking becomes difficult. I held my head. Everything was a lie. Our meeting. The marriage. Family life. Everything was built on fabricated lies. Tom said, my niece Jenny is 12 years old now. She's receiving counseling and recovering little by little, but she still has nightmares. I can never forgive that man. Did his ex-wife have other children? I asked. 2. Jenny and another boy. Both were abused. Tom's voice was trembling. Detective Miller stood up. We're arresting Ryan McBride, or rather, Brent Kennedy. We'll have him in custody tonight. Then she looked at me. We'll need you to testify as well. For now, stay by your daughter's side. The next day, I was called to the police station. Chloe remained hospitalized in the hospital, with a nurse attending to her. In the interrogation room, I faced Brent. He was handcuffed and wearing an orange prison uniform. But his expression remained unchanged, expressionless. Why did you lie? I asked. Tears spilled over. Brent shrugged. If I'd told you the truth, you wouldn't have married me. What did you do to Chloe? I just disciplined her. Do something bad, receive punishment. That's education. Education. I stood up. You nearly killed my daughter. What could a 6-year-old child possibly do? Brent looked away. I raised my ex-wife's children the same way. You have to be strict with children. You're sick, I said. You're someone who needs help. But I no longer think of you as my husband. Detective Miller entered the room. That's enough, Mrs. Kennedy. I left the interrogation room. I never wanted to see that man's face again. Several weeks later, I received contact from the prosecutor's office. They would be charging Ryan McBride with multiple counts including child abuse, fraud, and identity falsification. This time there would be no suspended sentence. They said a prison sentence was certain. I also spoke with Tom several times. He brought his niece Jenny to meet me. Jenny, now 12, was a petite, quiet girl. I can't believe there's another child who went through what I did, Jenny said. But you're safe now, right? Yes, we're safe now, I answered. Jenny smiled. It took time for me too, but I got better gradually. Chloe will be okay too. Those words gave me hope. My daughter could also get her smile back someday. I could believe that. 6 months later, the trial was held. The courtroom was filled with spectators. I took the witness stand and spoke in a trembling voice. I was completely deceived. I had no idea who he was or what he had done. Tears overflowed and wouldn't stop. Tom's niece Jenny also testified. Now 12 years old, she looked straight at the judge and said, "The memories from 6 years ago still haven't disappeared. That man should not be forgiven." Her voice was small, but there was firm resolve in it. Medical reports, photographs of Chloe's injuries, past abuse records, the prosecution submitted all the evidence. The defense pleaded for a chance at rehabilitation, but the judge shook his head with a stern expression. The verdict was 12 years in prison. Brent, or rather, Ryan McBride, was sent to prison. He remained expressionless to the end. As he was being led out of the courtroom, he looked at me once. But I looked away. I didn't feel anything anymore. A year later, Chloe and I had moved to a new apartment. A second-floor room with bright sunlight streaming in. Chloe's new room had pink curtains that she had chosen herself. Chloe was going to counseling twice a week. At first she couldn't talk about anything, but gradually words began to come out. The number of nightmares decreased. She made friends at school too, and sometimes showed her smile. We continued to stay in touch with Tom and his family. Once a month, we'd all meet at the park. Jenny and Chloe would hold hands and play together. The two who knew the same pain seemed to understand each other without words. I had joined a child abuse prevention volunteer organization. Sometimes I spoke about my experiences at lectures. It was painful at first, but gradually my heart grew lighter by talking about it. I wanted to reduce the number of victims like me, even by one person. That desire drove me forward. On Chloe's 7th birthday, I threw a small party. Tom's family, school friends, and her counselor gathered for us. The living room was decorated festively with balloons and decorations. When we lit the candles on the cake, everyone sang happy birthday together. Chloe smiled shyly. But that smile was much brighter than before. Before blowing out the candles, Chloe looked up at me. "Mommy, we're happy, aren't we?" I hugged my daughter. "Yes, we've truly become a family now. People who love each other and protect each other, that's a real family." Chloe nodded. Then she blew out the candles. Everyone applauded. Outside the window, spring sunlight gently poured down. Our new life was beginning from here. The wounds ran deep, and it would take time to heal completely. But we had people supporting us. We weren't alone. Chloe held my hand. A small, warm hand. This time I would protect it. I vowed that in my heart. Tom raised his glass. To new beginnings. Everyone clinked their glasses together. The children had juice. I looked at my daughter. Chloe was laughing with her friends. Seeing that smile, I thought, we survived. And from now on, we would truly live in the fullest sense. Family isn't just about blood ties. People who support each other, trust each other, and love each other, they are family. And those bonds are stronger than any dark past. The party continued into the evening. Laughter echoed throughout the room. That sound was like the ringing of a bell announcing the beginning of our new life. There is hope. There always is. Believing that, we walk forward, facing ahead.